Hello and welcome to my new short and not very slick city tour. Well, this one's more of a town tour, and it's set in the 1980s. So I grew up in the southeast of England in the 1980s and 1990s, and this is a little bit of a nostalgic kind of recreation of the kind of town that you would have in that period in this area of the world. Um, so I'm going to talk about this town here. This place is called Thatcher Wood, and is by no means an endorsement of Margaret Thatcher or her policies, but it's just that she was synonymous with the 1980s in the UK, especially in towns like this. So that's why I've named it that. And the wider area, which has a couple of other kind of villagey places, as you can see over there and there, um, is called Astleyshire, named after Rick Astley, of course. So let's have a look around then. Let's start down in Thatcher Wood. Let's start right in the town centre. So here we go. Now, this is really pushing my computer to the limits. As I've said previously in my last video, I use a MacBook Pro with Apple Silicon chip, and I've got everything kind of set to the max. So it's really pushing the computer. I've got all the settings on super high resolution and so on. So it's as good as I can get it to look. But it is slightly jerky, as you can see in this zooming video. So yeah, so this area here, this is the precinct in the centre of town. Now, when I was a kid, for a few years, I lived in a town called Harlow in Essex, and this precinct here is a bit of a tribute to Harlow. It's kind of how I remember it being in the 1980s. It's probably not that accurate, but it's got similarities at least. And so for this area, I've used some assets from a creator called Mentos, MN Toes, and they've created these amazing parades of shops, which are based on some shops in Luton and Stevenage, I believe. But I'll just show you these models because I think these models are really superb. Like the level of detail at the back as well. You've got these flats which people live in above the shops, and you've got kind of like graffiti down here, and you've got even the door's got a bit of graffiti on it. It's all just so lovingly created. I really, really rate these. And these ones over here as well. Likewise, you've got all the flats at the back. So yeah, really good work. I think they're brilliant. But to give them a bit more of an 80s vibe, so these parades of shops by default have kind of modern shop fronts to them. But to give it more of an 80s vibe, I've used procedural objects to just cover up the signs, and in a few cases, the entire shop fronts with some 80s signs and 80s shop fronts that I managed to find on Google. So this store here, Presto Food Market, this isn't going anymore. This is like a real throwback to that era. I didn't change the shop front in this case, so it's got a modern shop front, but the sign is straight out of the 80s. And then next door to that, we've got Snack Express. So I left this one as Mentos had originally done it because I thought it looked quite 80s anyway. Then next to that, we've got a Wimpy. So Wimpy was kind of a similar chain to McDonald's in the 80s, but it's kind of, there's a few stores left now, but it's fallen out of favour a little bit. And then next to that is HMV, the HMV shop as it says here, which is still going in a few places, which is good to see. Next to that is like a local cafe. And a bit further down, we've got a Woolworths. So Woolworths was a massive retail chain in the 80s and 90s, and probably before that as well. Then we've got another Snack Express, and then we've got a Ratner's, which was a jewellery company. They used to sell low price jewellery. And we've got a Chelsea Girl shop, which is a fashion store, and then just another local cafe down at the bottom. So that's that side. And then on the other side, now I must admit these two parades of shops have the same shops, so I'll just focus on this one up here to start with. Got Londis, which in Mento's original asset, this was a Londis to start with, but I've just changed it to a more 80s looking Londis sign. And then we've got a Tesco's, a small Tesco's in this case, a WH Smith, which is like a retailer selling stationery and magazines and stuff like that. And we've got a Baxter's over here, which was a butcher's. And then we've got a couple of modern shops, which I thought looked sufficiently 80s to leave over there. Oh yeah, so we've got some market stalls down here as well. So let's have a quick look at this. I really like this one. If I can just spin around to show you, because this guy here is selling. I'll try just going around a little bit further. There we go. Oops. So this guy here is selling like old TVs from the 80s. If we can go in a bit further, he's got VHS tapes, and he's got boom boxes as well. Let's have a look from a slightly different angle. Oops. Yeah, you can see his boom boxes there. And it looks like he's got a VHS recorder down there as well. So it's all kind of proper on-brand stuff for the 1980s down at the market. So I really like that. So yeah, that's the central precinct. Now, just behind that, we've got a bus station. You can see a bus in here. Another thing that I've done is use procedural objects to recreate some of the billboards from the time. So we've got this one advertising Back to the Future, which has just come out, I guess. And this one is Carling Black Label, which is a lager. They don't call it Carling Black Label anymore, but you could still get Carling. So that's an old billboard from the 80s there. And likewise in the precinct, I forgot to show you actually. We've got this billboard here, which is advertising the privatisation of British Gas. So I vaguely remember this campaign. Oh, just ignore that car coming in and out of the wall. It just looks ridiculous, but there you go. I vaguely remember this campaign. If you see Sid, tell him, but I just didn't get it at all at the time because I was too young to understand it really, I think. We've got some teenagers down here enjoying the day. They're just props, so they're not actually moving, so that's why they're so still. But kind of adds to the texture of the place. So I mentioned Harlow earlier, and in Harlow you used to get a lot of houses like these, especially at the time when I lived there anyway. So it's really cool that somebody's recreated those assets in the game. So what else have we got then? If we go a bit further out from the precinct, then we've got this station here. Now there was only one British Rail train that I could find in the game with 80s livery on it, and it's this high-speed train. So yeah, we've got a couple of high-speed trains in the station here. It's a really bog standard, boring English station with nothing really to recommend it, which is kind of how a lot of them were in the 1980s. So that's yeah, that's in keeping, that's fitting. And just behind the station, we've got a few offices, kind of offices you would have got in the 80s. I tried to keep the buildings as much in keeping with the 80s as I could. I've even included some of the vanilla buildings like this one, because it kind of still looks quite 80s, doesn't it? And then over here we've got a college. Again, it's the most 80s looking college that I could find. College as in a university level in the game. So kind of based on the idea of that is based on Harlow College, which didn't look exactly like that, but you know, as the rest of it's based on Harlow, it's kind of in keeping with the rest of it. Where else should we look? Okay, so over to the main road that comes into the town centre, we have this building here, which is a leisure centre. It's actually called an indoor swimming pool in the game, but it really reminds me of the kind of leisure centres that you would get in the UK in the 1980s. It's like slopey glass, black glass was really in. Quite basic, but in its own way, quite impressive, I guess. And then we've got these flats down here, UK flats, which these were built in the 1960s, but you still saw a lot of them in the 1980s. I guess you still see a lot of them now, actually, to be fair. And we've got an industrial estate over here, an unsophisticated industrial estate from the 80s. And then over to the side of the industrial estate is a new bit where some developer has built a retail park. Now this is pure 80s. It's got a Pizza Hut. It's got a billboard for cigarettes, silk cut. It's got a B&Q. Now this asset here, in my opinion, is a bit 90s, but I've changed the sign to be the old 80s B&Q sign. So I managed to dig that out from somewhere on Google. And then we've got a Toys R Us. Now, yeah, these were amazing in the late 80s when these came out. It's such a shame they went bust, but I believe they've come back now, actually. And then we've got a VHS rental store. Now, we didn't have, well, as far as I know, we didn't have Hollywood Video in the UK, but it's the kind of thing you got in the 80s. So we definitely had Blockbuster, and we also had a lot of kind of small kind of independent video rental stores that you just got in town centres and so on. Okay, it started to rain, which is quite fitting, I feel. So, so one of the things that I did was subscribe to all of the 1980s European cars that I could find in the workshop. So most of the cars that you see in this game save are from the 80s or before. Some of the trucks that you'll see and things like the garbage trucks, they're not from the 80s because I just couldn't find any that were of the period in the workshop, and I don't know how to make it myself. So, although I wouldn't mind learning, to be fair. So yeah, you can see there's a lot of cars here. So there's like an old Volvo estate, an old Citroen, a Mini, got a Peugeot 205, absolute classic car there. Got a Land Rover, which is an evergreen car. This is some kind of Volkswagen. Now, I think this was actually Brazilian, but it kind of looks like the VWs you got in the 80s in the UK as well. So I included that one. Oh yeah, we've got a Fiesta over here, Ford Fiesta. Or Saab, classic Saab, Mercedes, Porsche 911, which was the real yuppie car of the era. There's a Fiesta. And also the buses are of the era as well. So I remember buses like this going around. Now these buses are actually from Hong Kong, but the same design was used in the UK as well. And these flats here, so these are actually French. But again, you saw these kind of designs all over the UK at one time from the 1960s and 70s. And this just really reminds me of Harlow in Essex at the time when I used to live there, and at the time that I used to visit it a lot when I finished living there. Now then, let's see if there's anything else that's particularly 80s to show you. Oh yes, over here we've got a supermarket called J Sainsbury. Now this is Sainsbury's, it's still going, it's still a very popular supermarket. But in the 80s was when they first started to build these out-of-town supermarkets. And this one here is really old-fashioned, as you can see, which I really like. I used procedural objects to change the sign on it because it was a German supermarket in the workshop. So I've just added the J Sainsbury signs to it. But I feel it kind of fits really well in this town. And then again, in the car park, we've got a lot of classic 80s cars. Oh yeah, look, we've got a Ford Sierra Cosworth down there with a spoiler. So might be a boy racer that owns that. BMW 5 Series there and a 3 Series. Vauxhall Cavalier there. And we've got another Carling billboard there. I've done some other billboards as well, but if I see one, I'll show you. Over here, we've got a ballroom. Now, I really like this asset. It looks a bit silly when it's all shiny in the rain like this, but it's actually called a surf ballroom. But it really reminds me of the kind of social places that you'll get in the aforementioned town of Harlow at that time. Oh yes, let's have a look at this estate behind it. So this estate of 70s houses. These models I love because you get these kind of houses all over the UK, And I went to a primary school which was on an estate that looked literally identical to this. It was so similar to this. Um, so this really, really reminds me of going to primary school. Let's have a quick look around. So you have detached homes, and then you have some semi-detached ones down here. And in the same style, you have bungalows. There's a bungalow. And also terraces like this as well. Let's go and have a look at the airport. So I downloaded all the 1980s airline assets that I could find. And here's one. It's just come in. Pan Am. It's a real shame, but Pan Am went bust, of course. So you don't see that brand anymore. But it's a very, I mean, it just feels so 80s, that brand. Love it. And we've also got TWA and British Airways with an 80s livery on it. But is there any sign of them coming in? Oh, here comes one. Let's see what this is. Ah, this is American Airlines with its old livery as well. Oh yeah, forgot about this one. There we go. So another classic 80s one there. We've also got these old cooling towers from the power station, which have mostly been knocked down now, unfortunately. But they just remind me of childhood as well. Okay, so that's about it really. As you can see, there's lots of roundabouts in this town, which again remind me of these towns from the 80s. I don't know why. Just memories, I guess. And just before we finish up, I'll show you a few of the other estates. So we've got some nice council estates like this one down here. We've got these kind of mansion block estates. So these assets are actually based on some buildings in Oslo, I think, but they look really similar to ones you get in the UK as well. And if we go over here, we've got a nice park, and we've got this area down here by the garages where people have just dumped stuff. There's a burnt out car there. Somebody's parked right up against a garage in a Ford Escort there. Yeah, so this has got the kind of messy, grimy feel that I remember a lot of from the 80s as well. So there we have it. I hope you liked this short but sweet tour. If there's anything that I missed out on and that you're interested in seeing, then please let me know in the comments, and I will endeavour to take some screenshots or do another short video or whatever. Okay. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and goodbye.